Hello, everybody. I am doing a surprise live chat, uh, kind of having relaxing holidays, and we also broke a major threshold at 30,000 subscribers. So, yeah, I'm excited to share that, and yeah, it's kind of a big benchmark for us, and yeah, what we're gonna do for this live chat is like similar to the other ones, is that we're gonna do live stream, except I don't really have pre-questions because uh, I did this as a surprise. So if you'd like to ask questions for me to talk about, feel free to put them in the comments. I'll get to many as I can. And if you want to make sure that I answer them, then do a super chat so that you get on the top of the list, because given how much frequent the questions are I get on this, I often am overwhelmed. So that's kind of the just the context here. And yeah, cool. You found me on the Savon podcast. I see. I It's different live than when I'm doing my pre-recorded videos. I didn't seem as composed on that video as I usually did, but hopefully you found it valuable. Where I studied, I went to UC Santa Barbara for my undergrad, and I attended a master's program at Villanova. So I had a mix of Catholic and public university education. Uh, yeah, what are from so that's the other rule though with questions is that I'm not going to answer specific investment or trade related questions given the nature of my profession. And if you have anything specifically about your financial situation, please contact me directly via email or through the consultation form that you could find on my website, just for compliance reasons for my firm. Uh, and so that's the thing is that what I can do for this Chiz is because I'm more surprised. Would you rather me answer your questions, or would you rather have me talk about the recent H-1B controversy that's going on Twitter and my thoughts on um, H-1B visa abuse and whether we should be having those to begin with, or the recent news of what's happened to the What If Alt Hist channel is also something on my mind that I could talk a little bit about too, if it's of interest. While I wait to hear answers on those subtopics, I'll start with some of these questions. Um, what are some of the first steps for people with a bare minimum and know-how in the global financial world? Well, it depends how old you are. Are you still in college? Are you out of school and have a different profession? Uh, or are you still in high school? So like it really kind of depends on what stage of life you are at. So if you're somebody in high school, really the first step is just reading a few finance books and maybe doing one of those paper trading programs. But don't do one that allows you to cheat by making trades after hours. You're not gonna learn anything from that. The second thing, if you're a little older and you're in college, um, I would take a finance course in university, and I would also start looking at the recruiting cycles and meet with some of the people who are recruiting your school if they are, or if not, look online and see, like, read maybe some message boards or YouTube or Reddit or just like Glassdoor and feel like, what is it really like working at these places? Is it like a culture that you would fit in? Is it the skills, what skills you actually need to know? How do you get interviews? And then if you're in the real world, like adult world, you can network a little bit, and just go to like industry networking events, whether CFA Society or the equivalent for other corners of finance, and get to know people that way and see if it's something you want to lateral over or switch. So yeah, so that's the other thing. And you can also do the CFA level one. Maybe even if you don't sign up to take the exam, reading the curriculum is a good foundation point. So hopefully that answers your question. Since I don't have really any questions right now, I think I'll talk about this whole H-1B controversy right now going on social media. I'm going to be doing a video about the economics of immigration coming up in about 3 weeks. But just as a preview, really, I think with this H-1B controversy, I think there's really two problems, and that's why you're seeing such a heated discourse that people are just talking over each other. On one side, you have employers and recruiters who are struggling to find top talent in certain fields that current Americans are not predisposed to do. And on the other side, you're saying like, hey, wait, like they're preferring hire these foreigners because they're willing to work for cheaper or longer hours or under worse conditions than what an American would. And both of those are true. That's the really the problem here is that there legitimately is a shortage of top talent for some of these professions, especially at the prevailing wage that they are demanding. The other side would be that it's also true that a lot of people are abusing the H-1B system to get people to be captive employees, basically borderline indentured servants, and having them work at much lower wages. Like my first job out of school, I worked with a lot of H-1Bs who were, and it was not a very good job that I had. And I was able to leave after 6 months because my residency status or legal status living in America wasn't dependent on holding those jobs, where people who are H-1Bs from other countries did not have that privilege. And the solution really to this problem would be you have to basically, we want the top draft picks, we want the top talent, but at the same time, we don't want to like pollute the wage scale by flooding in a lot of immigrants who are willing to work for a lot less money and make the lower pay for everybody else. So you can do is like Singapore used to do. They didn't do this technically like de jure, but it's kind of a de facto policy, is that they would let foreigners come fairly easily as long as the employer was willing to pay 20% above the going rate. So in Nick's world, if I was in charge of the H-1B system, I would say, hey, look, if you are a big company or a small company or anybody, and you want to hire a foreign worker, you can have them as long as you're willing to pay them 20% above the going rate for that profession. And if they legitimately are more talented, then you would have no problem paying them that premium. If they're not, then you're not going to do that. And so as a result, that will take out the ability to use the H-1B program as a cost cutter. And it will really serve its role is really to bring in talent that is better than what we have in this country or that we just simply lack. And you can apply this to international students too. Like if you go to a top 50 university, say in the US, and if somebody's willing to hire you at a rate above the average college graduate for the same job, then you should be able to stay. And if you're not, then you have to go back to your country. And that's kind of how you do this, is that you give the opportunity for the real best and brightest of the world to be here, no matter what country they're from. But you cannot use it as a way to just hold down wages and to be able to hire people under conditions that Americans would not. Labor's like any other market. At the right price, you'll find people to fill it. So yeah, you'll say there's a shortage. Yeah, there's a shortage at the going wage rate. If the wages go high enough, there won't be a shortage anymore. So that is my thoughts. And it's just Longhorn's comment here. I just answered that earlier in this stream. Yeah, I don't think that that's what my point being is that you have to have a 20% minimum premium over the prevailing rate if you want to bring in foreign talent. That's your answer. And so if you're not willing to do that, then if you're trying to use it as a cost cutter, then that's just going to be blocked under my policy. So that's how I would solve this, is that we don't want to, again, and with entrepreneurs too, like if you are a foreign entrepreneur who's either has enough money to self-finance their startup or has raised enough money that they could keep themselves alive for about 3 years without any sort of financial support from the US, then you should be able to start your business here too and get an entrepreneur visa. That's the other answer to that's the other kind of provision of allowing foreign talent too. Because we want the great business founders to be here and to stay here and help grow the economy and create jobs. What we just don't want is the system being abused in a way that allows people to be underpaid at the expense of both themselves and at the expense of Americans who are trying to get fairly paid for their jobs. So hopefully that's a good answer on this controversy. The next question, I would say, are Dallas REITs a good way to invest in the economy? I'm not, again, I don't talk about specific trades on this channel, but I don't even think there is a REIT that is only the city of Dallas anyway. If I'm wrong, let me know. But yeah, if you want to invest in the growth of the Texas economy, you should work in a profession that allows you to disproportionately sell to the Texas market, or you can move there if you don't already live there. Or find a company whose sales are disproportionately in Texas, like a restaurant chain who has either most of their profits there already or as a rapidly growth strategy there. And that's just one example. Or buying real estate. If you're really bullish on a certain region of the country, you buy commercial real estate there. Because if the economy is going to grow, there'll be more demand for commercial real estate. Then let's see. Does the Forbes wealth list actually represent the wealthiest people, or are there billionaires that are unknown to the public? Yeah, I don't think it's a very accurate representation of the general of the wealthiest people in the world, because Forbes only has publicly available information or voluntary disclosures. Like if you're some billionaire who owns a private business or made their money through political connections, like an oligarch in some other country, you're not going to disclose your assets. I mean, Forbes can guess on what your assets are, but let's just say I'm like counter elite billionaire here in Southern California, and all of my business holdings are privately held. I don't own any publicly traded stock, and I don't want envious people, particularly the class warriors on the left, to risk my safety. Or even that, I just don't want like the paparazzi or a certain attention bothering myself or my future wife and kids or my brothers and sisters or my parents or anything like that. I'm not going to tell anybody that I have money. All you're doing is asking for unwanted attention. And so because of that dynamic, I think that why would anybody disclose that if they don't have to, unless if they're somebody who has an ego and wants to show off, like say, I'm a billionaire. Like Donald Trump is an example of somebody who does have that kind of ego and would be like, and he would disclose his information to Forbes because he wants to signal, I'm a billionaire. You have to respect this, especially before his political career I'm talking about. And so, yeah, if you have a certain personality type who wants to brag, yeah, you might tell Forbes. But most people would rather keep a lower profile. And the way that they find the billionaires on the list is they look at publicly traded stocks and see who the biggest holders are. And they just make a rough calculation based on the market cap of that company and the amount of percentage of the company that person owns. And that's how they build the Forbes list. Or if they own a lot of real estate and they can track that, and you can calculate the estimated value of that real estate, and also you put the guy on the list. But if you don't have publicly information or voluntary disclosure, you're not going to be on that list, or your number is going to be way lower than what you say. Or if people who are more braggadocio about it, it might be way higher than it actually is. So it can play both ways, but the general answer is that it's not an accurate indicator. The next question is, how do you think IQ correlates with class status? That's a tough question, because I think there is some correlation for it in the upper middle classes, like the institutional independent professional classes, and the successful business owner and Ivy League classes probably have the highest IQ. Like the elites, there could be plenty of lower IQ elites because they just have inherited money and haven't had to really mentally challenge themselves for a long time. But among the self-made and the upper middle, for lack of a better term, classes, they are definitely probably the highest IQ portion on average in the country. And then below that level, IQ matters to a certain degree, because higher IQ are more likely to complete the needed education to move up certain class levels, or be able to do their jobs well enough to be able to hold a job consistently. So I think there is some correlation, but there are plenty of high IQ people who are born into lower class families, and just because of lack of opportunities, they're not able to move up. And then there's a lot of less intelligent people born into higher class families. And so that's the other thing too, is that genetically the IQ of men is often from their mother. So if a very wealthy man marries a less intelligent woman, then his kids may not be very high IQ, even if he's in a higher class. So there's that that also would skew it to a certain degree. So that is, but overall, in general, there is a somewhat of a correlation, but it's far, far from perfect. The economic outlook of Oregon. I don't know the answer really to the economic outlook of Oregon. I mean, Oregon was on a lot better track prior to the pandemic. They had some really bad lax on crime policies that encourage people to move out of the state. It has no sales tax, but it's some of the highest state income taxes, which makes it not the most competitive state to do business. And its cost of living is above average, but the level of major corporations there and major hiring, big companies who are hiring, is not above average. Like Washington is a much better state, I think, for business in the Pacific Northwest. Like I'm more bullish on Seattle than I am on Portland. So if I wanted to like make a bet on the Pacific Northwest, I would either go with along Idaho or along Washington relative to Oregon. But I mean, I don't think Oregon's inherently a bad place. And if climate change really is a serious thing and the average temperatures get significantly warmer, then Oregon is probably one of the biggest beneficiaries, because the Oregon coast will go from mostly a dreary place to a great beach location. But that's a little bit speculative. Are you generally bullish in 2025? I'm worried about unemployment rate curling up and fewer rate cuts. Long term, I'm very bullish on the economy for the reasons I mentioned in previous live streams, and just the fact. But I think there could be some bumps in the road possibly in 2025, just due to a lot of the hopes going in for the upcoming administration may not come as quickly or smoothly as anticipated, and you have a very relatively high cost of living, and wages have not been able to keep up, and that eventually catches up to you. So I think there's a risk of a slowdown in 2025, but I'm not outright necessarily calling for recession here. I'm going to go now that I have plenty of questions. Let's go back and scroll through um, some of these previously. Um, all right. How do you think that poverty upholds profit? What do you mean by that? Poverty in general is probably worse for profits and the economy because these people cannot afford to support themselves, and it's either going to result in economic losses due to crime or economic losses due to redistributionist policies. So I think poverty in general is bad for economies as a whole. Um, there are certain industries, if you have a social welfare state that keeps people out of floor that benefit from the dependent classes spending disproportionately on them. But I think for the whole economy overall, no, it does not. I don't think poverty holds up profit. Um, yeah, so Longhorn, I'm not really seeing. Can you do me a TLDR of like what the question is that you're trying to ask here? Because I'm not really sure. All right, for someone who's clueless in finance, what is introductory books, textbooks you recommend on personal finance, public finance, and corporate finance? For more personal finance, you could read Ramit Sethi's book, "I Will Teach You to Be Rich." You could um, read the CFA Level 1 curriculum for more theoretical finance. And for public finance, I'd have to get back to you on that one. I mean, I've read several books related to public finance, but they usually go into a niche of a specific issue as a part of public finance rather than like public finance as a whole. Let's see. Do you think Canada's situated to become America 2.0? Do you think that Canada has smart leaders? And it can thrive like the U.S. Yeah. The problem is Canada's built its entire culture on being anti-America and doing the opposite of America. Usually, since America is known as being like the most free market country in the developed world, Canada takes pride in having a more bureaucratic, regulatory, socialistic state. And so that's Canadian nationalism is precisely what gets in the way of Canada being great due to their whole national identity being opposed to being American in that sense. So yeah, that is my my answer to it. Yeah, they have all the potential. They have a lot of natural resources. They have a relatively low population density outside some of their core cities, and they have a relatively good level of education. So the thing that they need to do is they either need to build new cities from scratch or greatly expand their housing supply, and they need to deregulate, and they need to encourage more end use industries because their whole economy is like a rentier economy right now. It's that they sell natural resources they mine out of the or drill out of the ground, or they are selling each other overpriced properties to collect rents off of them, whether it's rent off the land of natural resources or rent off the land from real estate. You can't have an whole economy based on that. You have to actually have something productive. And Canada's the size of California, has the potential to have plenty of productive things. It's just, will their society allow enough creative destruction and enough business development to do that? And will the investment community shift away from investing in non-productive assets such as real estate into more productive assets such as emerging companies? But yeah, I think it has the potential. It's just a matter of will, and I will they enact it. And given how poorly Trudeau is doing in the polls, there might be some hope that they will. Um, let's see. At what point do you think the market will price in rising sea levels for properties which will become beachfront and that will be sunk? Um, I don't think they will ever do that because I don't think that sea levels will rise enough to really sink properties outside of the few very low lying, like barrier island type situations, maybe in the Atlantic coast. Uh, Miami should have been underwater a long time ago, but they built infrastructures to pump out the water and keep it afloat. And there's seawalls and there's a lot of other fixes that you can do to fight off that, especially given like the NASA numbers. They're anticipating about 10 inches of sea level rise in the next 80 to 90 years. 10 inches is not going to really be enough to flood a major metropolitan area in the United States. So I think the answer is they're not. You would need sea levels to rise 2 feet or more before people start pricing that in. And I don't really think that's going to happen in my lifetime. What are the odds of Greenland being annexed? I mean, it's non-zero, but if I had to put an odds maker at it, maybe 10%. This is just, I haven't looked at, I'm going to look at the Metaculus actually about this because I wonder what the consensus is. Metaculus, if you guys don't know, is like a prediction market type of website that people can vote on the odds of certain events happening. And I'm just curious what they have to say about this one and whether my number isn't really in line with the consensus on this. I hope they've done this question. All right, so I'm surprised there's no question on Greenland here. No, I guess there's no prediction market for Greenland, which is actually kind of surprising for me. But I put it at 10% then. Why are there a lot of upper class people in Colorado? Colorado is a really nice place to live if you like to ski. It does snow in the winter, but the summers are fairly mild. It doesn't get too hot. And it has actually, Colorado, I think, has the most sunny days of any state in America. That's also the lowest obesity rate because you have the most days where you can do outdoorsy things in the country. And so there's these elite ski resorts, places like Aspen or Beaver Creek or Snowmass or Vail that a lot of wealthy people like to have winter homes in, or some of them live there all year round. And Denver's a rapidly growing city. A lot of businesses are moving there. And so that's a reason why you have wealthy people in Colorado. Next question. What do you think of Diego Schwartzman as a tennis player? I don't know. I've never heard of him. Polymarket. I wonder if Polymarket has odds for Greenland. I'm going to search that too. Thanks for the suggestion. I got a super chat. Is the stock market a game of smoke and mirrors? No, it's not. You should watch my videos. Is the stock market a casino, where I go more into detail about this in a 20-minute video. But in general, in the long run, the market does price for fundamentals. In the long run, I mean over a complete business cycle. It doesn't seem like that's working because we've extended a lot of the business cycle has been kind of altered due to certain policy decisions. And as a result, it's not seeming that efficient. But yeah, if you have over a full market cycle, things get priced fairly and profits continue to grow. And that's why the stock market goes up. And when profits go down, the stock market goes down. And so, yeah, that's my answer. Let's see. Will Trump be able to control inflation simultaneously bringing down the national debt? Well, if he actually did bring down the national debt, that would control for inflation. Does that mean a tighter fiscal policy? And one of the drivers of high inflation is the fact that we have such a loose fiscal policy in a lot of the world. and we have a relatively tight monetary policy to compensate for it in the US, but it's the fiscal policy though problem that needs to be fixed. So that's the answer to that question. Thanks, Grant, for the super chat. Glad you like the channel. How many consecutive episodes of Jeopardy do you think you could survive? I don't think I'd even make it to Jeopardy. I tried out a few years ago, and I didn't make it because I lacked knowledge in pop culture and 19th century literature and the more artistic type things. And you need a very strong, like, gestalt of information to be able to make it onto Jeopardy. I'm really good at things like business, finance, history, even sports trivia. But like popular culture, music, and like the arts, I'm very lacking. So if I could do like a tag team with like one of my sisters who's really good at that stuff, we'd sweep Jeopardy. But my lack of knowledge in those niches will prevent me from making it onto the show. So good question. Okay. You want to what's going on with the What If All His channel? Well, he posted a rant about 10 hours combined in 3 parts about his life story and his philosophy on a lot of things. And I'm not going to disparage people individually on the channel, but yeah, and I thank him a lot because reactions to his videos is what got this channel off the ground. Like if it wasn't for him having enough economic takes that were worth me challenging, I would have never gotten my initial audience. I went from like 0 to 3 to 500 subscribers thanks to the reactions against his videos. And so that's the but like he seems like based on that video and he's taken it down since that he might have some things he's struggling with on the mental health side, and I hope he gets the right help, and I'm praying for him to get better and continue to make good history content. Let's see. What do you think about the backlash that Vivek and Musk are getting when it comes to work visas? It makes sense to a certain degree because they kind of came off as out of touch. Vivek has kind of taken it back since. And there's a real dilemma. Like the tech people do have a shortage of people that they want, that they can get to do these jobs, and especially at a rate that makes these companies profitable. A lot of tech companies struggle with profitability, especially in the growth stage. As it is. But it doesn't mean that there's no room for reform of the H-1Bs. I kind of have a more middle of the road view when it comes to that. And you can watch earlier in this live stream about this. Hey, Turbo, thanks for watching. I see your comment. What is the best state metro region to develop and build and sell homes? I don't know the regulatory views on housing in every part of the country. So a lot of it depends on regulatory climate, but it's probably, as I've said before, the upper Rocky Mountain region, places like Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. You're seeing a lot of movement there due to lower cost of living, people wanting to go to more rural, outdoorsy type areas. The nature's really nice in those places. And a lot of political migrants are moving out there. And Idaho has consistently been the fastest population growth on a percentage basis of any state in the United States. So that's from purely a demographic and migratory perspective. It's probably that, and also that area is fairly young in terms of age and family formation. So that's probably where you want to go. But yeah. And then do you see yourself a creative person? Why do you think you're creative? I definitely consider myself to be a creative person. I mean, I wouldn't make this channel if I wasn't. When I was younger, I liked to draw a lot and do ceramics and like even a little bit of like painting. I used to record random like more fictional movies with my friends for fun. And I know I used to write a lot of short stories and fantasy, just like when I was especially in the fourth grade, I wrote like as part of my creative writing curriculum, like 5 or 6 mini children's books. Uh, and so I've always had that creative spirit, and I've always had like a lot of idea generation. But the thing is that I quit creative writing because it was hard for me to write relatable dialogue for characters. Like whenever I write people like conversations in a fiction piece, it would sound like plot driving robots. That's what my creative studies professor said at UCSB. And I continued to struggle with that. And that was like, I have all these great ideas for premises of like new worlds or like stories and overall plot arcs, but like creating the human experience and the emotional like character development, whether through just like them experiencing different feelings or conversations, or that was the tough part for me. Or I would write a whole story and I do like it sound like an outline, and I can't, and adding the fluff and the adjectives and all that was always a challenge. And I've done podcasts before, so I don't know. I think creative is partially just because that's how I am. It's a personality thing. I don't think it's something that you just become one day, because like I have family members who are just as intelligent as me, but they're far more pragmatic and they're not very creative. They're much more disciplined than I am, and they're especially in terms of their academic studies, but they just didn't really have the interest. And then I have others who are even more creative than me. So it's kind of just a personality thing, to be honest. Is unrestricted immigration a net positive or negative for the blue collar working class? It's a net negative, and I'll talk about that more in my video and come up in a few weeks on the economics of immigration. Um, all right, let's see. What's it called? How do you know so much about where the old money and the elites live? I've never seen somebody that goes into it that much detail. I mean, I know because this is often, at least in my circles, casual conversation. And also when you drive to places, you kind of just tell. I've lived in a lot of cities in my life. Like the first video were all the cities that I've lived, were the 4 cities I spent the most time in the United States. And that's how I was able to know, because I've lived in all those places. And you kind of just learn that intuitively. You can also look at average income data and like the average housing prices to get an idea as well. So that's another thing that helps. But yeah, you kind of just, and also you kind of know when you talk to certain people and figure out where they're from, or where certain business owners and other people live, or where certain meetings are or conferences. There's just kind of, and also studying history too. And that's how, the fact I've studied a lot of history, that's how I know where the older money places, because that's where the rich places were. I don't know, 50 years, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And that's why I've been slower to make some of the newer videos in that series, because places like the Midwest and the Southeast, I quite frankly haven't spent that much time in personally. So if I was going to make those videos, it's based more on what my friends who live in those regions tell me, or what I've read on the internet, or I've read in books, and it might not be as reliable. But I am doing on Sunday the next region in the Geography of Money series, but it's not in the United States. That's the only hint, but you'll find out where when I do it. Let's see. Next question, really, I'm going to say is, will California and New York turn libertarian Republican? I mean, eventually it will. It's just a matter of how much and at what time. Like I talked about this in my interview with Chris Street that I did earlier this month. He thinks California will be a red state within 3 election cycles. So by 2036, at the latest. Like you'll think it'll be a solid 10-point red state by 2036. He's a lot more optimistic than I am about that. I think California is more likely to stay blue for at least the next 20 years, but I think it could be purple by 2044. You're starting to see the demographics realign in a certain way that will make California more competitive. And they continue to have bad economic policies that run it into the ground. The more left-wing people will have to move out for better economic opportunities and more prosperous cities. And the people who are left will pick up the pieces and try to fix it. So that's usually how these things work. I did it on the iceberg economics towards the end. There's this theory, if you want to hear, called the prosperity theory of economics. Of democratic politics, where basically when a city does well, it attracts more left-leaning people. They vote a certain way. It slows down the growth, and then things start not to go as well. And when they go bad, those same people move out, and then it becomes more conservative. Like look at Michigan and Wisconsin as examples of that, or California and Georgia as examples of that. Once prosperous places that became more progressive as they got more successful until it slowed it down. And I think California is really at the risk of becoming the next Rust Belt, in the sense that its bad economic policies are going to catch up to it. And because of that, they'll reform their politics. The next question is the super chat. Will real estate markets be affected by AI job loss? What markets may benefit from changes AI will cause in the job market? Thanks. Yes, it definitely will be. I think the market most at risk for that is Northern California, San Diego, and Seattle, and just the western half of the United States generally. But I don't really know what cities would disproportionately benefit from AI. It's more who's going to lose less. So the places that have the highest percentage of jobs being disrupted will be more at risk, and the places that less will be less at risk. But AI, I think in general, is going to be net negative for housing prices, because I think it's on the net going to reduce wages or higher end employment in the long run. What is the reasoning for California and New York coming a red state? Well, it's because they've had enough bad economic policies that people just realize that they need to change something. Like that's what happened with Michigan. You had a lot when Detroit declined, they lost a chunk of their population, and the people moving out were disproportionately younger and more progressive. And the people who stayed were more conservative leaning, and that changed the voting patterns. And people realize when something doesn't work, after a while, they decide they want to fix it. And I think California, New York, the other thing is there's a kind of a low key thing. They have a disproportionately high Catholic population, and the Catholic population of all ethnic backgrounds is starting to trend to the right. So that's another reason. What's your opinion on the CFA? I think the CFA is a great way to learn about finance. I took and passed all 3 CFA exams myself. It's kind of become a little bit less prestigious in recent years due to a variety of reasons. But if you want to work on the buy side, like as an analyst or a portfolio manager in the public market space, it's still worth doing. And it's a lot more cost effective and time effective than most MBA programs, especially the ones outside the top 10 to 15. What's a macroeconomic force in 2025 that'll catch people by surprise? Yeah, I think that the deficit going down possibly is something that could catch people by surprise, or that the economy just slows down in general because everybody is so bullish right now. Let's see. Do you think the markets are pricing in a dystopian future? No, it's the opposite. They're pricing a very rosy future right now. Where'd you come with the idea that they're pricing in a dystopian future? Do you believe in minimum wage? Is it true that Sweden doesn't have a minimum wage? I don't know about Sweden's minimum wage policy. I know Germany didn't have one until the mid 2010s, but I generally oppose minimum wage because all it really does is just create a higher floor, and above that level, you're just not going to hire people. You're either going to try to replace them with a bot, or just work or to not start that business if it's not profitable at that level. I think that if you want to make sure wages are high, you need to have a good education system to have a minimum level of productivity so that people can generate enough value that is more than minimum wage. And you got to keep the labor supply down by restricting immigration, and so that the supply of labor doesn't flood the demand. There are better, if you want higher wages, there are better ways to do it than a minimum wage. And I am somebody who is, let's see, will I fit in with your fan meetup? If I'm young and don't know anything about finance. I mean, not everybody who shows up to my meetups are finance professionals. In fact, I went, at least at the Vegas meetup, I think I was one of 2 financial professionals who were at the meetup. So yeah, if you want to learn and talk to other smart people about bigger picture things that you're going to find versus mainstream conversation, come to the meetups. They'll be fun. And that's a good segue. Speaking about the meetups, we've got 3 meetups lined up. The first one that we have is San Francisco, coming up to in January 2nd, so next week. And I just posted a link to the Eventbrite page with all of the upcoming meetups. And then we have San Diego on January 11th. And then we have Laguna Beach, which is going to be the only one I'm doing in the greater Los Angeles, Orange County area, on January 25th. So if you're in LA and want to come to a meetup, I recommend coming to the Laguna Beach one. And so those are the next 3 on the calendar. I want to try to get one in Florida in February. I don't have enough votes yet, though, from people who want me to come to Florida. So if you Floridians who are watching this want me to come, leave in the comments or vote on the poll, which is in the description here, of where I should go, because I'd like to do one sometime before it gets too hot there, and meet some of my audience in South Florida. And if I'm going to do one in Florida, it's going to be either in the greater Miami area, probably Palm Beach County, or in Tampa. But yeah, so that's probably my first stop really in the East Coast will probably be in Florida. Other places where I do have the votes, but the climate is not really favorable for me to go there yet because I like to avoid the snow and the cold, are New York, Boston, DC, Philadelphia, Seattle, Dallas, and Austin, Texas, and Zurich, Switzerland. Those are and Chicago. Those are the places that we are going to have meetups. We've got the votes for them already. It's just a matter of when I schedule those. And yeah, if you want me to do a meetup in your city, click on the link that below to vote, and I will put it in the chat. So that is that's kind of the update on the meetups. We've got 3 coming in California, and the other thing I want to do is I'd like to do a European tour in the summer. It's probably starting in August, where I meet up with all the European audiences, and I'll go to as many European cities that have enough of you to want me to come visit. The only one that's voted enough is Zurich. So the Swiss, you guys are going to get a meetup. Hopefully the rest of them. I'd like to go to Italy for Jubilee in 2025. So hopefully, if anybody's watching this who lives near Rome and wants to help me set up a meetup for Jubilee for the channel, that would be awesome. The other thing is, the question is asked, am I Jewish? No, I'm not. Ethnically, I'm Swiss, German, Italian, Portuguese, and a little bit of English. And my religion is I'm Roman Catholic. Super chat is, I agree with your minimum wage thesis, but isn't it limited to workers with high skills, antithetical to corporate shareholder priority? No, it's not. Like, supply and demand applies at all levels of the wage scale. There's not an unlimited amount of low-skilled people to do stuff. If there was, then labor would be free. So, yeah. Let's see. Are you a disciplined and focused person? If so, how do you do it? I've struggled with discipline my whole life, and I'm just asking everybody for advice. Yeah, I would say I'm a moderately disciplined person. I have very good negative discipline, which means I am very good at avoiding doing bad things. Like I don't drink alcohol. I don't really consume any recreational substances. I don't smoke. I eat fairly clean. Um, but positive discipline is something. What's it called? Um, that I have some struggles with sometimes, like especially when in my school days. And it's like the positive one is the idea of going out of your way to do something you don't want. And really the key to developing, um, yeah, um, what's the, I'm going to, yeah, some of these trolls I might have to manage based on some of the comments, but what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, positive discipline. Yeah, is positive discipline is something I had to learn over time. It's really you have to do really with this is you have to have a good reason why. If you don't have a good why, you're never going to motivate yourself. And once I developed the why, because I was a pretty lazy kid, I was really big into gaming, and I wasn't very physically active other than when I was forced to do swim team. And so, and I would try to procrastinate a lot in my school. And the reason I probably did that because there was a lot of I'm trying to put this in the right words. I just felt like I had all the time in the world and I'd lack a sense of urgency. And no reason why. Like I just wanted to get good grades because that's what you're supposed to do, or I want to be healthy because that's what you're supposed to do. You need some sort of internal motivation beyond that. And once you develop that, and you have a real reason why you want to do something, then that's what develops positive discipline. Like for example, being an entrepreneur, you're a lot more inspired to work hard than if you're working for a big company because it's all you're on the line. Like there's nobody who's going to coworker who's going to bail you out if you slack on your responsibilities. You don't have a fixed salary no matter how well or how poorly you do. It's all on you. And you have that kind of incentive structure, you're more likely what was I going to say? You're more likely to um, be motivated to do things. That's my answer. And yeah, do taxes reduce productivity? At what point would taxation be considered fair and not theft for the average citizen? Watch my video about tax structures I did in early December about what kind of taxes are more fair than others if you want more details on that. I mean, income taxes definitely reduce productivity. Like taxes generally are disincentivizing. They punish certain behavior or relative to other types of behavior. That's just basic economics. When you make it more expensive to do something, you're more or less likely to do it. And so taxes, whatever, the higher the taxes on whatever thing, whether it's consumption or income or property, people are less likely to do those things. Whether it's income taxes higher, they're less likely to work hard. If property taxes are higher, they're less likely to buy real estate. If sales taxes are higher, people are less likely to have discretionary consumption. If vice taxes are higher, people are going to consume less vices. So that's exactly what it's about. How to manage your taxes is really the key. Because taxes are negative incentives. It's like and subsidies are the reverse. Yeah, Will, you've asked like too many questions. I can't really catch up on them, so we'll leave some room for everybody else. Next question is, can you make a program about the impact of the creation of the Federal Reserve? I'm working on a documentary about the history of the Federal Reserve. I'm trying to find a more objective book about that and other parts of the research because like the only thing I find is either like the Fed's official histories and data, or the conspiratorial side of things like the Creature of Jekyll Island or Ron Paul's and the Fed. And I'm trying to find a good source that is kind of in between, so I can make a relatively objective story about the history of the Fed. But it's been hard. But it is something I've been working on. Yeah, I will make. Yeah, I just made. Yeah, I guess now that we're big, I guess I'm gonna need moderators. So I made a mod. So I never really had this problem before. Let's see. What are your thoughts on technical analysis? I might do an iceberg about technical analysis. I think it's good for risk management. I don't think you should be selecting investments based off of it. Let's see. How different was the economy before the Fed? It was very different. Yeah, I think that the main difference is that the Fed does is that you're trading stability of the currency in exchange of economic volatility. Like pre-Fed, when you had a hard gold standard, the economy is a lot more volatile. You had way more explosive booms to the upside, and you had way bigger crashes and panics where the entire market would just clear, and the economy would be really miserable for 6 months to a year, and usually would come back quickly. Sometimes you have depression. You have more depressions too. So once every few cycles you have a depression that would last 2 years or more due to the excess of the previous mania removing. So the pre-Fed world, the currency was always stable. It was always worth a fixed amount of gold, and it didn't depreciate like it does now. The downside was you had more economic volatility. And so essentially what you are getting is that you have a larger with the Fed, you have more economic stability. Like the recessions aren't as deep and the booms aren't as crazy high. It's more stable, and that allows maybe more healthy foundation for investments, kind of in a way. But at this, the sacrifice is that the government just prints money when when things go bad, or they allow the government to spend more by keep putting rates down, and they create artificial booms. So that's the problem when it comes to the Fed, is that, yeah, they suppress volatility. So like your downs are worse. Like if it wasn't for the Fed, the Great Recession probably could have been a repeat of the 30s. But then at the same time, you now have very unaffordable housing prices and other negative externalities from the Fed keeping rates too low for too long. So it's pick your poison. Do you rather have stable currency and more economic volatility, or more social and economic stability and a consistently weakening currency? That's kind of the pre-Fed versus the post-Fed world in a nutshell. Missed my response on AI and real estate markets. Basically, what I said is that AI doesn't really help any real estate markets, but I think it disproportionately hurts ones in cities that have disproportionate amount of jobs that are at risk of losing them to AI. And the professions that are most at risk to AI are things like that are very relatively high skilled but repeatable, like coding or accounting or stuff like that. So yeah, I think the West Coast has disproportionate risk due to AI. Do you think Spain still has the potential in the future? In your video, you're surprisingly optimistic. Do you still feel that way? Yeah, I think it still does, but its governance is the problem, and they need to change their culture about entrepreneurship. And those are the main issues I have with Spain. I haven't really seen any signs of them trying to fix that. But if they can, Spain has a lot of potential. It's got the best climate in Europe. It's going to be it could be like Florida and attract a lot of retirees and remote workers. And it's got an easier base if they want to expand via immigration by just bringing in people from Latin America versus less culturally aligned groups. So they still have all those upsides, but their government gets getting in their own way, and their culture and regulatory culture preventing new entrants and entrepreneurship is hurting them too. But yeah, um, let's see. Um, all right, I'm going to go back and scroll up with some of these questions. I think Polymarket is a good substitution for finding news. No, not necessarily. I mean, even if the prediction market says it's a 60% chance of something happening, it still means a 40% chance it won't. But if you see unusual activity and something moving one way or the other, it could be a leading indicator. I submit the Fed exacerbates the Cantillon effect. Yes, it does. You're correct about that. My truth. Let's see. I'd like to know your vision about North Africa. Well, North Africa is a very diverse region. Like Morocco has a very different economic outlook than Egypt. If you want to see my economic outlook on Egypt, watch the video I did about this time last year called The Economic Future of Egypt. I haven't done a big breakdown on the rest of them. Egypt is the biggest market and the one that has a publicly traded ETF, and that the investment community tends to follow a little bit more closely than the others. So I know a little bit more about it, and it has a more in-depth history, but I might want to do one about Morocco in the future. Um, I don't really have any comments about Algeria, Tunisia, or Libya, or Mauritania. And I think south of that is really no longer considered North Africa. Um, let's see. Can you explain what PPP and nominal GDP is? Okay. So nominal GDP is just the amount of hard dollars that the country generates in um, revenue every year. So if you add up all of the spending and revenue, like or then in the economy, then you would that's GDP. It's just how much actual economic output is being produced. So if you add up all the revenue from everybody, or all the income, sorry, better earned by everybody in the economy, that is GDP. If you want purchasing power parity, that's what PPP. That's when they adjust it for the cost of living. So, say for example, you have one country where the GDP is $1,000 and another country where the GDP is only $800, but the country that is $800 has a cost of living that is 50% less than the one that's $1,000. So effectively, if you adjust it for PPP, the purchase power parity adjusted GDP of country B is $1,600 and 60% wealthier than country A. I don't like using PPP calculations because a lot of countries have political incentives to make their cost of living look a lot lower than it actually is. So the PPP multiple is higher and it makes their economy look bigger than it really is. So that's why I use more nominal GDP for my analysis, because I just don't trust what is the metric that they are using for the PPP. Like, yeah, so like if a country says that their cost of living is the same as half of the cheapest state in the US, when if you go there in real life and you realize it's not, then you know that the number is kind of cooked. So that's my thoughts on that. Let's see. Isn't that every country has the incentive to reduce the cost of living for citizens? No, they don't actually. They have the incentive to make it look cheaper for the PPP calculation, but in reality, no, because if every country had the incentive to reduce the cost of living, then housing prices would not be high. Like a lot of countries have their voters who own property and they value high housing prices, which if you want to keep housing prices high and you want to be real estate as a replacement of retirement savings, then you actually have the exact opposite incentive. You want, and also a lot of quote unquote middle class jobs, especially in places like healthcare and education, are the byproduct of high cost of living for things such as education and healthcare. So no, it's not really perfectly lined up that. Um, so that's if you solve the housing crisis, do you solve the everything crisis in most developed countries? No, I think it, but it's a step in the right direction. I think you would solve the demographic crisis if it really is a crisis, um, based on that. And I think the housing crisis would be solved if you solve the regulatory and monetary policy issues. And I think housing is more of a symptom of bad policies in other parts of the economy than a root cause in its own self. Um, all right. Now I'm going to scroll up and see what other questions that I've got here. Um, all right. Can you tell us your start, your first job, your first investment? Um, let's see. I mean, I don't know how far back. Like my first investment was some shares of a railroad stock I got from my grandma on my 12th birthday, which I kept for over 10 years. And that worked out fairly well. It wasn't, and it was like $100 back when I got it. And it was low four figures when I sold it. But that's my first quote unquote investment that I ever had. My first job, are you talking about like my first job out of college or my first job I ever had? My first job I ever had was working at an ice cream shop, and I was terrible at it, so I didn't keep that for very long. Um, my first job out of school was being a financial data analyst, and it was more of a kind of a coding data entry type job than a financial one, which is why I decided not to stick around there. But yeah, uh, like, and then the rest of my career, I worked as an analyst or a portfolio manager at different hedge funds before starting my own business. Um, what is your opinion about the New Deal? I think the New Deal delayed the Great Depression and dragged it out longer than it would have otherwise. Um, that's my. I might do a bigger video about the New Deal if it's of interest to people, but that's my opinion on it. Um, let's see. Trying to see where you see the dollar euro pair. I'm not going to talk about specific trades. That's one rule that I have. Yeah. All right. You want me to come to Boston? Yeah, I will probably come to Boston sometime in the spring. I have already had a lot of votes there. Um, let's see. Um, how did you join a hedge fund to become a portfolio manager? Well, I mean, I got a job as an analyst. That's how I got. That's how I got started. Um, I mean, let's see. What social class or tech workers are well compensated but not integral into the establishment, such as lawyers, bankers, and consultants? Um, they are either middle class or institutional professional class, depending on how close they are to the establishment. Uh, let's see. Are you optimistic about the upcoming administration? Yes, I am. And if you want to see why, check out my previous live stream where I went more into that. Um, let's see. How how do people look at charts compared to the abundant access we have today? Well, before the internet, technical analysis was way more niche, and you'd have to draw the charts yourself or read them in like a financial newspaper. And the indicators are a lot simpler. So yeah, that's that's the difference. But I wasn't trading back then. Like I don't have any living memory of the stock market before the internet. So I'm not really the one to ask. Um, let's come to Scottsdale. Well, I'll come to Scottsdale. I have enough votes, and it's not 100 degrees yet by that time. Uh, I like to play golf in Scottsdale. And I did actually live there for a brief period in my life. Um, you make a video about anarcho-capitalism. Will it be better for healthcare services? I talked about anarcho-capitalism in my Iceberg of Economics series. You can see the individual part, or in the recent video I released over Christmas, where there's there's in the chapter section, just look up anarcho-capitalism and you will find it. You want to plan a Colorado trip. I mean, I have some friends who live in Beaver Creek, so maybe I can go visit them sometime and do a meetup there. I don't really have a very big audience in Colorado, though, at least as of now. So it might be a while. When the bubble pops, inflation rises higher on average compared to historical levels. What happens? Usually those don't happen at the same time. You don't have the bubble pop, and like if the bubble's popping, it means there's not inflation. Like the way that the overvaluation in the financial markets is going to happen is going to be resolved as either inflation erodes the real value and the nominal value comes down, or you have a bust and the nominal value comes down and there is no inflation. So that's usually how one of two ways. Like the rare exception to that would be like 1974 or like the 70s. But even in the 70s, you had a decent amount of nominal GDP growth in the economy. It's just the real growth was bad due to inflation. Would you say social class is determined by your genes? No, it's not. It's there's plenty of, like, if you look at the why, if it's determined by genes, then you have certain countries be the everybody would be in the same social class. Every country has a top and a bottom, so it's not purely a genetic thing. And like I think it has more to do with values and upbringing and how people apply themselves and what incentives in your society enable advancement. Let's see. Do you have any thoughts on the supposed commercial real estate crash? Well, I mean, there's already been a big crash in office building prices. That happened starting in 2020. So, like, I don't really think there's necessarily some surprise wave coming. But again, commercial real estate isn't my expertise, so don't really quote me on that matter. But I haven't really seen anything to indicate that there's going to be a disproportionate crash in commercial real estate as a whole. And if you maybe saw like apartments might be at risk just because people can't raise rents anymore, and you have people probably bought at too low of a cap and can't cover their debts. That's a possibility on the apartment side, and also lower immigration rates, maybe reducing demand for apartments. But it's not my niche. Let's see. Your thoughts on Trump pushing crypto? I think it's unfortunate, to be quite honest. I'm not a big fan of crypto, and I think it was a great political strategy because the Bitcoiners really had no reason to be on one side or the other. And if you promise to support them and their causes, they have a lot of disposable money to donate, and they're very loud and vocal people. And so they'll help spread the word of your campaign and maybe swing a few voters your way. So it's a great political strategy. Do I think it's a good economic policy? Like the proposal of the Bitcoin Reserve? No, it's not. I already answered the question about the H-1B situation. Most depressing economies in the world are Haiti and Ukraine. I mean, they're up there. I think probably there are certain other countries in the world that are probably even more dire than those, to be quite honest, though. So I don't think they're at the bottom, especially if there's some sort of peace in Ukraine. They have some room for upside at that point. Yeah. Do you think it's truly possible to become a billionaire and be truly humble and ethical and honest to get to this level, or is it reserved for unethical people? So you're saying really, just do you have to be a sociopath to be rich? No, you do not. It really depends on like your internal values and how you were raised, like, and also like what kind of money. What it does is it magnifies like who you are already. So if you are naturally a mean and vindictive person, but you just didn't have the resources to enact your revenge, for lack of a better term, then by having money, you now have the resources to act out what you couldn't. Like this person who seemed like a nice guy was always a mean guy. He just didn't have the resources or the social status to get away with that behavior. So there's plenty of wealthy people who are some of the kindest hearted people in the world. They donate a lot to very good causes. They are willing to help people anonymously. Like I've known a few of them through like religious communities and things like that. So it's really just, it kind of reveals it. And yeah, more sociopathic people are better at playing the game of office politics, which is one of the skills to move up the class ladder. That's the one kind of thing I would give on that sense. But yeah, but I don't think it's necessarily a requirement, especially on the counter elite side of things or the old money side of things. But for those who are moving up the ladder really quickly and doing it through the institutional path, there's some of a cutthroat element to it. But yeah, you don't have to be, especially if you're an entrepreneur. You just have to provide some sort of enough value to people in a way that can get you to that level of wealth, which is very difficult to do, but it can be done. Let's see. What is your advice on building wealth in 2025? Well, I run a wealth management firm for a living. So if people need help with that individually, they can directly contact me. I'm not going to talk about that on a public live stream. What do you think about MicroStrategy joining the NASDAQ and gaining Bitcoin risk? I don't understand why you're putting a company that is nominally a software company, but essentially a levered Bitcoin vehicle into the NASDAQ 100, which will be some of the 100 biggest United American growth companies in the world. Like, I think it does is it increases the systematic risk of the NASDAQ 100. And if that risk is not being priced, then incorrectly, invest accordingly. But that's my view on it. I don't think it was a very good idea for them to do that. Let's see. What are your thoughts on what's going on in Canada? Housing and groceries are crazy here. I mean, it's the same kind of inflation that's going on in a lot of other places, but Canada's problem is that they have a lot of immigration as a percentage of their population, but they're not building enough housing supply to catch up, and that's what's driving housing prices up, along with just a culture of housing speculation driven by the fact that they didn't go down during the GFC, and that their economy doesn't produce enough real stuff to have incomes that are high enough to justify the price level. How to better understand healthcare stocks, what to study? Well, it depends. Are you talking about like medical device companies, hospitals, or biotechs? I mean, it's really just to study them. For those, you just got to study biology and just medical science, honestly, which is why I generally am not. I don't really have an expertise in healthcare stocks. Nick, would you consider software engineers part of the independent professional class or the institutional professional class? They can be, if they're a software engineer and they're building their own company, or they're a freelancer mostly with multiple clients, then they are independent. If they're working for a larger company and they have like they're getting compensated highly and have connections to the establishment, their institutional professional class, or have a ladder to move up there, or if they're just a more isolated, lower paid software engineer than your middle class. So yeah, it really depends on, the answer is it depends. Those are the three situations. Will we always need oil? I think oil always, not always, but like I think it will be a part of the energy structure for all of the viewers' lifetimes here. There's just its relative density and compactness makes it work better than electric alternatives, um, or or solar or wind. And even if you do replace all the vehicles with EVs, those EVs are more likely to be powered by what's it called, natural gas power plants. So yeah, I think we'll need less of it, as especially as a percentage of total energy consumption, as alternatives become more financially viable. But it will always be a part. Like we still burn, there's still biomass being used as energy in a lot of the world today, even though that stopped being the predominant use of energy in the 19th century. Uh, what do you think about nuclear? I think nuclear power has a lot of potential, and a lot of the fears from Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and Fukushima have held back um, a lot more development. If you really want a clean energy system, nuclear has to be a part of it. And I'm bringing on my colleague Murphy McCann to do a deep dive on nuclear energy sometime in January or February, kind of like what we did with the AI video. I don't think it was one of my least watched videos recently, but I think it was a really good primer about the AI industry and how it affects like markets and the economy. I'm probably gonna do something similar with nuclear power. Um, what are your thoughts on the Luigi Mangione situation? I did a poll on that on this channel, and I was really surprised on how many people were defending him or justifying the kind of decision he was making. It's kind of scared me a little bit, to be quite honest. I don't really think vigilante justice is acceptable in a civilized society under really any condition. So that's that's probably my opinion on it right there. Uh, let's see. Will quantum computing be the next big thing after AI? I'm still doing my research on quantum computing, so I'm not informed enough to say. I don't think it's as gung ho and surefire as AI was, though. Um, it's probably more valuable than blockchain, but probably less valuable than generative AI. So it's somewhere in the middle, but I got to do more research on it. Um, let's see. Is it practical? Let's see. What U.S. bank is best for a non-U.S. resident? I don't know the answer. I mean, I'd probably be the one who just has makes it the easiest to transfer money or has local branches in your country. But I don't really know the answer to that. How could somebody go from the counter elite to the establishment elite? There's a few ways. One, you can use politics, like I think what Musk and Thiel are attempting to do is just use electoral politics to gain the political bona fides to really enter the establishment and make your view the dominant one of society. You could just socialize and befriend a lot of these people and send your kids to their schools and work your way that way in, and so that your children and your grandchildren will be the establishment elite. You could marry into those families, or you can move up the establishment. But if you're already in the counter elite, you're not going to want to move up the institutional ladder. You can have your company, say if you do have one, you can maybe sell your company to one of these big establishment multinational corporations and then move your way up to become the CEO of the multinational corporation. That's probably another way you can do it, or getting an appointment, like or electoral politics. So it's really it's transitioning your financial capital into socio-political capital is the way you would do it. Give me your portfolio allocation and percentages under 30 seconds. No, I'm not going to do that on here. If you want that, again, you could contact me directly. That's what I do for my clients. And it's not my opinion on military as far as class structure. I think military is mostly middle class, unless if you're some of the really higher ranking officers. Then you're more in the institutional, professional, Ivy League class level. But yeah, military is mostly middle class. Let's see. Any advice for the underclass that are hoping to turn things around? It really depends on what situation you're in. How old are you? Have you finished with your education? Are you not finished with your education? Because if you're younger, say like 18 and under, you should just maximize your educational opportunities. That'll help you at least get a floor at the lower middle class. Other things, you just gotta know. The other thing is just avoiding a lot of the vices that hold down people in the lower classes. I might do a video about it, but I have to figure out how to do it in a way doesn't come off as too harsh and judgmental. But that's really kind of the advice, and also have an entrepreneurial mindset. Just think like, what can I do that can help the most people in a way that will actually have market demand? And that could be whether that could be as an entrepreneur, or that could be within a bigger company. But just figuring out where everybody has something to offer and has some sort of value. You just have to figure out what that is for you individually. Do you consider yourself a libertarian? I have a lot of libertarian sympathies, but I don't consider myself entirely a libertarian. I would have, if you asked me 10 years ago, the answer probably would have been yes. Or when I was in college, especially. But now I've lived enough in the world, and I've seen what happens when libertarian policies and certain issues go too far. And it's caused me to change my view a little bit on that. No, because the problem really, the logic about is it too early to invest in nuclear energy companies based on the fact the build out takes years in advance. And again, I'm not going to make any recommendations one way on any current publicly traded nuclear energy companies. I'm still doing my own research on this. But it's just in general, the thing is that it depends how early. It's like, if it's so early that like nobody's even thinking about it, then yeah. But but when it comes to a lot of the market will often anticipate things happening well before they actually do. And so like an investment is often pricing in the probability of the good outcome happening. And it will price sometimes a better than 50% chance of the good outcome happening well before it happens. What layer of libertarian policy has been implemented? I don't know. Look at Las Vegas, Nevada, and San Francisco are places where, at least on the social side of things, you've seen a lot of libertarian policies been enacted. On the economic side, you've seen places like Hong Kong and Singapore have very libertarian policies. There's really no pure Ancapistan in the world. So if that's what you're asking for, no. But you've had individual libertarian policies on specific issues being enacted in several U.S. states and several countries. And you can look at the results of those specific ones to see that certain parts of the libertarian ideology just either don't work or don't line up with your personal beliefs and values, or some that have been very successful and do. So yeah, it's again, do you believe as one's life success defined by their 20s, is this a human being's most formative years? There's a book by Meg Jay called The Defining Decade, which goes a lot into that basically saying like your 20s are when you basically figure out your education, you set your career path, your social trajectory, and usually find your romantic partner you're going to end up marrying. I think it was more true, like, say, pre-1990. But based on that logic, which is what I hate, one of the dark sides of self-improvement social media, where like all the self-help people on Twitter or on YouTube or books, a lot of people say, oh, you got to get everything done by your 20s, because if you haven't accomplished all your goals by a certain age, then you're not going to make it. And that's like the worst message you could really send to people. Like, by that logic, I'm over 30. If I didn't hit all of my life goals by the time I turned 30, was people like me supposed to just give up and quit? Like, I wouldn't be here right now if that was the case. And I just think that's what that logic, even if it's true, is very hurtful to most people. And I think it also depends where you live. If you live in a higher cost of living place, or you're in an industry that requires a lot more capital to start a business, or requires a lot more expertise or skill to branch out on your own or do what you need to do, it's going to take you more time than something that's a little bit simpler. And it also depends on your ambition. The grander ambitions you have, the longer they're going to take. If you're someone with modest life goals, you can easily get everything done by the time you're 25. If you have more grander things you want to do with your life, it's going to take a little bit longer. That's just how life works. And especially in a world that's increasingly more complex and requires more minimum amount of knowledge and skills than it did before, the timeline's lengthened for everything. So no, I don't think your life's over if you don't succeed by your 29. And I think really there's two different stages of life. There's the build up stage and the coast stage. And the build up stage is what most people are in the build up stage in their 20s. And a lot of people start the coast stage at 30, but you don't have to start your coast stage at 30. I try to be a source of hope and not despair, really, on this channel. Hopefully that answers it. What's it called? How can we fix the American healthcare system so it's cheaper and yet still provides quality care and assimilates innovation? Well, you kind of have an impossible trinity problem there. I see my videos I did with Austin Walters that go into the healthcare system. But the problem is with the healthcare system, why it's so expensive is because on one hand, the goal is to have high quality care that is accessible to most people. The other side of it is that we want to use healthcare as a source of middle class and upper middle class jobs because we no longer can have those jobs through manufacturing. And you can't have both. Like, if you want to cut the fat and save costs, you can easily do that. You can do something like what Elon Musk did with X, with the entire healthcare system, if you really wanted to. The problem is you would lay off a large chunk of the population. Healthcare is 17% of GDP, so about 1/6 of income in the United States is related to healthcare. If we cut healthcare in half, that's approximately, whether it's through profits from shareholders or people's jobs, you're going to lose all those. You're going to have a lot of income being lost, mostly in middle class jobs, whether it's hospital administrators, bureaucrats in the insurance, healthcare system, nurses, doctors, etc. So that's really the choice societies make. Do we value more employing these people at relatively high wages, at a relatively stable in terms of job security role, or do we prioritize cheap, affordable care? Because this is a dilemma I keep having with this healthcare issue. So that's the issue with it. Like, these healthcare, health insurance, is kind of has its own flaws, especially with the negative incentive structures and the minimum amount of gross spend that is required, that health insurance companies have fixed margins, so therefore they have to manipulate their costs in certain ways. And then on the other side, you have things like the AMA, which cap the amount of medical school slots and doctors that can be in this country, so that doctors can have higher salaries, or the unionization of medical staffs in general, or the fact that a lot of these hospitals hire administrators, which people aren't sure what they need them to do. Again, I'm not really an expert on all of this, but we kind of have the worst of both systems, where we have the government intervention level that keeps costs high, but we have the free market incentives that encourage maximizing profits without the regulatory freedom to compete on cost. So it's kind of a mess, to be quite honest. And if you look at health insurers, their margins are lower than the S&P 500 on average in terms of net profit margins. So it's not really just purely an agreed thing on the side of health insurance companies. The problem's a lot deeper than that. Yeah. So the next question really is, and it's the same thing with the college. What's the issue? Like, the reason why college costs are so high, because it's used to employ a lot of administrators who otherwise wouldn't have jobs. And then you have the negative sense, the student loans, government-backed student loans. Yeah, I already talked about the what if all his situation. It's really sad. I hope he gets the help he needs. I'm praying for him. Yeah, hopefully I never get that level of hubris. You guys need to keep me humble. Next, let's see. I'm 17. What would you say is the best field to go into high IQ? Choose what you're legitimately interested in. If you're that intelligent of a person, you'll find a way to make money in it. You don't want to pick something just for the short buck, because by the time you do all of you complete your education 5 years from now, the world will be so different that that thing that you did, they thought would be profitable when you started school, may no longer be in vogue. It's like the Harvard MBA indicator, like the type of jobs that, or the emphasis that MBAs get, like, often is negatively correlated with what is going to be the successful industry 5 years after, because people are just chasing the current fad. So yeah. Okay, I'm thinking about relocating to a lower cost of living. What are your thoughts on this? Well, can you preserve your existing income? That's a big question. Because if you can keep your income and move to a lower cost of living place, that's a way to save. Do you have family ties that keep you at home? Do you have kids, or are they already grown up? Like, if your kids are already grown up, then it's a lot less of a sacrifice. But if you move your family out to a lower cost of living place and take away certain educational and social opportunities, it might not be the best thing for them. So it's a complicated answer. So it really depends on your personal situation. For more specific situations, feel free to contact me directly, because I don't talk about specific individual situations, particularly financial situations, on these live streams. Let's see. I'm going to be on here for about 12 more minutes. So if you want to make sure you have a question answered, feel free to go in the super chat, but put your questions in now generally, because I'm going to get off at about 5 o'clock my time, because I do have dinner plans. Let's see. I already talked about H-1B earlier. I don't really have any specific thoughts on Ripple. Let's see. Are emerging economies better for upward mobility, like India, or should I move to the USA or Europe? It really, I think it depends on a lot of variables, like where you are on the class structure. Like, economic growth can be great, but if you don't have the ability to capitalize on it, it's not going to help you. And also, what opportunities you have in other places. So again, a private equity bubble. Yeah, private equity, I do think, is a risk of being a bubble. And the the reason I say that is because historically, private equity used to be something that people would have a discount. Like you would have to demand higher returns to make up for the lack of liquidity of getting out of a private investment, which makes sense. Like if I have to be locked into something for 5 years and deal with the risk of that company failing, I should be compensated to take that lack of liquidity. However, due to the success of private equity in recent years, particularly the smoothing return effects of private equity funds, a lot of institutional investors actually prefer the lack of liquidity because a lot of private equity firms don't mark to market their assets. And so their return profile looks a lot smoother than it actually is. Like private equity has the same return profile as like a double leveraged small cap value fund. But the reason why it's more popular among institutional investors is because when the small cap value fund has downturns, the double leverage small cap, if it's down enough, you get margin called. But even if it's not, you're going to have much worse returns on paper, and you're going to see that downside volatility, and it's going to show up in the Sharpe and the Sortino and all those other measurements of risk-adjusted returns. Whereas private equity will have the same downswings in its business, but they won't mark to market, or they'll mark to market the value is a lot less, and so it will look a lot more smooth. And the smoothness of the returns is what's attractive to institutional investors more than the returns itself sometimes. And because of that, you've seen a lot of capital flood into private equity, and so that's why I think there's a risk of a bubble in private equity. Also, most of private equity is LBOs, a lot of it, and venture capital, and those are historically negatively correlated to rates. And so say you're doing an LBO and you buy a company when rates are 7%, and you do a levered buyout to buy the company, you cut the cost, you pay back the debt, and then you sell it at a higher multiple to another private equity firm. And the reason the other private equity firm is willing to pay a higher multiple because the going interest rate is now 5% instead of 7%. And so you can justify a higher multiple. And so that is why private equity did so well for so long, because rates were a downtrend basically dating back from the 1980s to 2021. And now we're seeing higher highs and higher lows in interest rates. The LBO model might not be as viable. So that's my thoughts on private equity. Are you born with high IQ, or is it developed? I think you're mostly born with high IQ, but it needs to be realized. I think there's an epigenetic component to it too, in the sense that, like, if you're not educated correctly or don't have the right environment, or you don't have proper nutrition, you may not max out your IQ. And so the answer is both. Thanks for the super chat. What advice do you give to freshmen uni aspiring to be a PM career-wise? I would study something that is relevant to being a portfolio manager, whether it's finance, accounting, or economics or math as your major, and you can do something of your personal interest as a minor or something else. And then I would just I would try to get at least internships the summers between your sophomore and junior year and your junior and senior year. And then while you're in school, you got to figure out what part of the market actually interests you. And once you do that, then you can make case studies and use that instead of a cover letter to kind of show that you actually have the baseline skills and know what you're doing. Yeah. How do you know if you're low IQ? You'll take an IQ test. That's really the answer. I mean, I took the Mensa exam, so that's why I know what my IQ is. So, I mean, most people don't bother to do that. But if you're curious, you can take the Mensa exam, and it will tell you what your IQ is. Any advice getting to Stanford? I didn't get into Stanford. It's very difficult. So, I mean, you just got to be the best of the best and have something that has you stand out on top of your grades, because, as I said in my Ivy League video, there's a lot of people, even with perfect GPAs, who are rejected from Stanford. What do I mean by case studies? Like, say, for example, you want to work at a long short hedge fund. You write a case on why you should buy or short a stock, and you write your thesis and you show all the numbers to back it up. And whether it's financial fundamentals, technical analysis, all of it, macro drivers, you just do a complete survey. And then based on that data, you say, well, I'm bullish or bearish because of X, Y, and Z, and then prove it with all those numbers. So, yeah. Do you know any old money areas from old world countries who moved to the US or other countries for political reasons? They often tend to be the new money or old money places of the new countries. Like, look at Mayfair of London, for example. It's filled with a lot of foreigners, and that's historically one of the wealthiest and most prestigious neighborhoods in London. So it's typically the same places. Let's see. What if the markets are manipulated by the government? Well, if you think all the markets are manipulated by the government, then you shouldn't really be investing, or you should just do what you believe that the government wants you to do. There are certain countries that you can trade that way. I don't think the United States was one of them, though. Do you see any issues with private credit? I'm an income investor, heavy exposure to BDCs. Love those high yields, but I'm willing to change if needed. Yeah, private credit has the same issues I talked about with private equity. It's become this trendy asset class, and because it offers higher yields, but at the same time doesn't have the same market risk as a bond. So you got to be more selective with your private credit than you used to in the past. There probably are still good opportunities out there, but you got the same variables are at play. I'm not going to get into my specific outlook on private credit or specific investments because that's not what I do on this channel. But if you want more of that, you could contact me directly, and we could talk about it offline. Have you spoken in the past about Bitcoin? Are you pro or con Bitcoin? I mean, I did a video about Bitcoin 4 years ago, and it's basically a speculative vehicle. If I had to say pro or con, I'm definitely probably in the con camp for Bitcoin. I might do a video more on why that's the case, but watch my old video. I think it's hard to invest in something that doesn't have an intrinsic value. What is the busy Ponzi scheme in the economy? Yeah, I mean, if it's a Ponzi scheme, people usually don't want to disclose it. So I don't really know what the biggest Ponzi scheme really in the economy is right now. What are your thoughts on the Doge initiative? It seems to me they're a way to get rid of regulations that hurt the bottom line. I think the Doge initiative is admirable. I mean, I hope it succeeds in cutting government spending in a material way and making the government more efficient. There's a lot of room to cut things without reducing output, especially in the defense sector. But given the political incentives in Congress, I'm not sure how they're going to succeed. So, yeah. Let's see. Did you get high SAT scores? I got in today's SAT about 1370. So that's considered high. Let me know. I mean, I got 700 in critical reading and a 670 in math. So do you think it's realistic? I didn't take the ACT, so I probably would have done better on it because it was more subject based more than just the SAT, which is more just like raw aptitude. Do you think it's realistic to abolish the income tax? If you're willing to cut the government spending enough, you could do it, or replace it with a national property tax or a VAT or something like that. But over 40% of government revenue is in income tax right now, so that's a pretty big shoe to fill. How is the dating market in Southern California? The answer is it depends what you're looking for. I might do a dating special in February. Like I'm thinking of these live streams in the future. I am going to do more themed ones. Like for January to be goals related because it's like the new year. February I might just do one where I answer all the questions related to this because I don't want to be a manosphere channel. I have no interest in that. That's not my background or expertise. But there's a lot of intersections with economics and dating, and a lot of people are curious about it. So I might just do a live where I answer those questions. In addition to the one video a year, I call it the Valentine's Day special, where I release around Valentine's Day one video that is related to the intersection of finance, economics, and the dating market. And you can watch my video about adverse selection or the debunking the doomer on marriage for the previous ones Valentine's Day specials I've done, if you like that kind of content. But yeah, what's it called? Yeah, let's see. Do you think America will have another civil war soon? No way. I think the recent election results basically reduced the odds of that from say like 4% to 0.25%. So yeah. Thanks to the chat. Will you do more live streams? Yeah, I'm gonna do 1 or 2 a month. Like usually they'll be either tied to certain benchmarks or like a certain theme. If I do it more than that, I think I'll run out of things to say or there won't be enough questions. But I like doing these. I enjoy doing them. It's a good way to interact with the community. Yeah, that's yeah. Do you anticipate a return of QE and ZERP in the future? Not unless if inflation drastically drops and stays low for a long time and you have a very bad recession, like depression. Like you'd have to have a repeat of 08 or something like that, because right now, if you try to do that now, you'd have higher highs in inflation and the Fed would lose its credibility. So I don't see that coming in the future. Let's see. Is it financially easier to be a man or a woman in America? The answer is neither. They have different cost structures that they kind of wash out. Let's see. Why do you think the Fed cut rates? The Fed cuts rates when there's an anticipation of this economic slowdown or recession, or that the inflation has come down, that the monetary policy is too tight on a real basis. And there were signs of the employment market weakening and the economy slowing down. And so the Fed kind of reacted a little bit by cutting rates. But when it didn't really roll over as anticipated, that's why they stopped their track, in my opinion. Do you know any old money neighborhoods that disappeared? I think Hyde Park, like where the University of Chicago used to be, I think, a little bit more of a nicer neighborhood than it is now. But my Chicago commenters can tell me if I'm wrong about that. There are probably other Rust Belt cities that have similar things. Like, I don't think any neighborhood is built originally to be a bad neighborhood. So usually a lot of worse neighborhoods start off as at least better neighborhoods. But how many are old money originally? I wouldn't know. But just look at declining cities anywhere in the world and you'll probably find them. Do you think it has anything to do with reducing the cost of borrowing? I think for this time around, like in the last few months, no. Maybe in previous Fed cutting cycles, the answer might have been yes. But yeah, thank you everybody for watching. But I think I'm going to wrap this up soon because I have dinner plans that I got to get to. But thank you all for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys again live on January 1st. I'll start it when I'm finished with all my errands and work tasks in the morning. And I'd like to see you guys all on the tour. So hopefully you guys can come join me at these events coming up in California or whenever I come to your city in the future. And thank you for all the support. We're at 30,000. I really enjoy doing this for you and sharing all this information, and hopefully you guys get a lot of value out of it. Have a good night, everybody, and thank you for watching.